Oh man, I wish I could say the vibes are better, but this is not a place where happiness is found, at least for these three beat reporters. Welcome in. It's the All NFL, All City Sunday Huddle. I'm Johnny Venerable from PHNX Cardinals. I've got my guy Joseph Hoyt from DLLS Cowboys and Henry Hank Chisholm covering the Denver Broncos for DNVR Broncos. We are fired up here to be with you on a Sunday night, ready to recap everything and anything in the NFL. And pretty eventful Sunday, my guys. Let's first kick it off. Immediate reactions to what I am ready to deem the worst primetime game of the year. Barely consumable, Joe. Bengals at Giants. Danny Dimes reverting back to his turnover ways. Immediate reaction from an otherwise throwaway Sunday night game.
Yeah, I think you kind of said it right there, man. I mean, we've seen Danny Dimes as, Cowboys, people who follow the Cowboys. We've seen Danny Dimes now on primetime, and I can tell you I did not want to watch it again. But we did a little bit, and it was just kind of what we forecasted. Obviously, kind of Bengals squeak out one there. The Giants are just a little bit hard to consume right now with Danny Dimes and co. And, hey, at least it's over.
Hank, my guy, are you impressed with the Bengals? You're an AFC brethren. Are you impressed that the Bengals found a way to beat a bad Giants team on the road?
No. The Bengals are not impressive. That was one where, I'm sitting in the press box. I'm trying to write as fast as I can so I can get home to do this. And you just keep looking up and you're like, oh, 7-0. Oh, still 7-0. Oh, still 7-0. And you see like a tweet from Dov or something come through and you're like, oh, well, sounds like their interception in the end zone from Danny Dimes. Who could have seen that coming? No, I mean, it's just two bad teams. I'm glad the Bengals get to enjoy a win. But no, I mean, you don't get any points for beating the Giants, especially in a game like that.
Everybody drop a like on this stream, subscribe to the podcast and here on YouTube. It's one of the least impressive box scores. Like if you're going off of box score analysis, both teams' leading rusher was their quarterback. Daniel Jones had 56 yards. And Joe Burrow, of course, had that 47-yard touchdown en route to 55 to lead the Bengals. But I think this is going to be a widely forgotten game by two teams that I do not believe are going to be around November, December relevancy. Like I think we'd all agree, like I wrote off the Giants before the season started. And it is a shame to some degree because I actually like a lot of how they team built. Like Andrew Thomas is a good player. They have probably the apple to a lot of Arizona Cardinal fans' eyes. They have a very competent, capable defensive line. Brian Burns, who they got for a second-round pick this offseason from Carolina, he had a sack. Azeez Ojulari, brother of B.J. Ojulari, who's hurt for the Cardinals, he had 2 sacks. And, of course, Dexter Lawrence. Like, they have the makeups for a team that should be, a good watch, commendable in a lot of games. But then you turn your attention to the offense and, like, I'll bag on Daniel Jones as much as the next guy, but, like, on top of his egregious turnovers, like, they have no good running backs. Their starting running back tonight, Tyrone Tracy Jr., just under 3 yards per clip. Darius Slayton's their leading receiver. I mean, they have, like, the meat and potatoes down of how you win games in the NFL, but they have no cachet, and then they certainly have no quarterback. And then on the flip side, with Cincinnati, I just feel like they've missed their opportunities. Like it's over. Like if you're opening the season with 3 consecutive losses, including a loss at home against the Patriots, like you are not to be taken seriously this year. Like, Joe, I'll throw it over to you. Like the trajectory of Joe Burrow's career is interesting because he gets that contract extension. You've got Jamar Chase wanting more money. T. Higgins is still around. Like, where do the Bengals go from here if they have another kind of middling, wasted season a couple years removed from that Super Bowl?
No, I think that's a great point, and I think it kind of brings me back to the blonde hair that Joe Burrow's rocking. It's the Slim Shady look, and it kind of makes me wonder, who is the real Joe Burrow? Who is the real Slim Shady? And I think that's something that's kind of been on our mind for a while now because, we saw him have that one great year at LSU, obviously becomes the number 1 overall pick. We saw a lot of highlights in the beginning. Injury kind of happened. And then there was kind of like hey, we see the potential there. What's it going to be? And, I think we're kind of, I think between him and Trevor Lawrence, we're kind of seeing guys that I think we know what they are to a certain extent. And I think maybe the ceiling isn't as high as we thought. And I think they might be a little bit more limited. Obviously the Bengals are a little beat up right now. They don't have the same running game. Joe Mixon's gone. Chase Brown's been pretty good, but it's not the same Bengals team that was kind of riding at the high of Joe Burrow. And I think, we talk a lot about in Dallas, like, hey, when you get paid, that, responsibility is thrusted upon you. And I think a lot of it's been thrusted upon Joe Burrow right now. And I think we're seeing a little bit of the struggles a little bit, overall throughout the season of what that kind of entails.
Yeah, totally. And as a Broncos beat writer, we keep looking at T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and you just keep hoping every single week, like every loss means they're one game closer to trying to move on from one of those two guys. And I'm curious if they could actually pull the trigger. Like, there's just so much at work there that who knows if even if everything goes well that they're willing to pay both of those receivers. It just seems like this is a team that's kind of on its last legs in its current form, and they're kind of looming over the brink of a mini rebuild at the very least. And it's looking like that should come pretty soon.
Yeah, Lou Anarumo interviewed for the Cards job. He's the Bengals defensive coordinator a couple of years ago, and I liked what he had done on paper, and that unit has seemingly regressed. I know they had a better outing tonight. I've never been a Zach Taylor fan. I thought he was very much a byproduct of the greatness of Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins that year they went to the Super Bowl. And I've watched Ken Whisenhunt get to a Super Bowl and then flame out when Kurt Warner leaves. Like, you can get carried to the big game by an elite quarterback wide receiver combination. We saw that here in the desert. So I don't know. Like, you're not viable in my opinion at 2-4, but they live to fight another day. They're in a loaded division outside of the Browns, where certainly the Steelers and the Ravens are very credible and are going to be in this, I would assume, especially Baltimore until the end. And then the Giants, to me, like, I think at some point when you lose enough, and I know the NFC East, Joe, is terrible, and we're going to talk about it, but when you lose enough collectively and you know that the head coach probably isn't going to be around, certainly the GM is taking a lot of flack. He's probably going to lose his job. They don't, have a winning record this year. How quickly does that team at 2-4 look ahead? I don't know these quarterbacks as well as years prior in the NFL draft, but Joe, the New York Giants have to believe, like, if we're middling around just below 500, do we just say, you know what, let's take our losses the rest of this year, put ourselves in a position to have a top 10 pick and get a signal caller next April for the next regime?
Yeah, and I think that's something that they kind of were teasing around a little bit with this year. That was kind of some of the rumors flying, hey, will they go up and get a quarterback? Even the GM's son was like, hey, man, maybe Zayden Daniels, on Hard Knocks. And I think, honestly, Hard Knocks was very interesting from a Giants perspective because I think it showed us some of the mistakes that they've made, frankly. I think that, one of the problems, or not one of the problems, one of the ideas in the NFL right now is like, hey, you don't have, you got to get a quarterback to win, right? But you don't have to pay every single quarterback. I think we've seen that with Daniel Jones. Do you pay someone like that? I would argue no. And obviously I think we're seeing that. And that is a big reason why Saquon Barkley's gone. And, I think if you're the Giants, you're probably going to fire Brian Dable. You're, like you said, the GM might be gone, so you might be cleaning house. It makes sense to start over. The one problem is, who do you go get? And I know Shadur Sanders is a name that's been, really popular. There's a couple other quarterbacks that are kind of separating themselves. Cam Ward, maybe from Miami, is really impressed. Could he kind of do that Joe Burrow thing where he skyrockets up? You never know. I think that, the one thing that's kind of becoming more apparent, though, as we go is right now what's going on in New York is not the answer, and I think that change is coming.
Yeah, Hank, I look the position the Broncos were in last year, and we'll talk about Bo Nix, but the fact that they kind of played themselves out of that top 10 range for a lot of those elite guys and then ended up with, well, what was Bo Nix, like the 5th quarterback drafted within the first, or maybe the 6th within the first, like
6th.
Yeah, like 12 to 13 picks. Like I wonder if the Giants just have too much talent up front. It feels funny to say on their line of scrimmage. And again, like you don't have to be the first to second to third QB drafted to have immediate success, Hank. But, like would you feel better off in hindsight, the Denver Broncos maybe lost out last year and put themselves in a position for a Jaden Daniels or a Drake May? Or do you believe that, Bo Nix has shown enough?
Oh boy, I mean, Bo Nix hasn't shown enough to say he's going to be a great quarterback. The thing is, I go back and say you'd really like to have Jaden Daniels. You'd almost certainly prefer Caleb Williams to Bo Nix at this point. Drake May, I've seen the stats from today's game. I didn't see what actually happened. I think Bo probably has good of a chance at panning out as anybody except for, Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. There's more of a ceiling question probably, with Drake May in particular. You probably opt for that. But I also think that there's value in having a decent team to put the quarterback into. And I think, the Broncos last year, if they don't blow that game to the Patriots at the end of the season, all they needed was after that the win against the Raiders at the end of the year. And it's a Raiders team that's terrible. So I think that quarterbacks pan out when they're in good situations, and there's obviously exceptions to that rule. I don't think the Broncos have regrets, though.
We're going to talk about the Denver Broncos, their loss today against the Los Angeles Chargers. Everybody feel good that we can put this Bengals Giants game to bed and never speak of it again. Everybody collectively feel good about that.
Yeah, take it outside, old Yeller, that thing. Let's move on. Yeah.
Okay. I would love to do that with our 3 games earlier today collectively. I can't talk about my team anymore right now. I'd rather listen to you two speak first. So let's start with a game. We were doing our post-game show at Gila River Resorts and Casinos Wild Horse Pass here in Phoenix, and we were licking our wounds. And in the corner of my eye, Joe, I watched the destruction, the disassemble of the Dallas Cowboys, specifically defensively. So I want to start there. I actually thought Dallas was playing better than their record indicated coming into this matchup. And the Cardinals, who I don't think have an iota of the talent Dallas has, played Detroit tough and lost by just a touchdown. There was actually a pick 6 in that game that was reversed on Jared Goff. So I expected this to kind of be a fun back and forth affair, especially in Dallas, in their stadium, on their home turf. You look up, and the game's over at the end of the first quarter. I mean, Joe, walk us through your initial assessment. Did you see this coming today in Big D with Dallas?
Well, it's kind of funny because after the game, Jerry Jones called it a shocker. And in reality, no one should be surprised by what happened today because AT&T Stadium, where the Cowboys played, it used to be a safe haven for them. They had an incredible home win streak that they carried all the way into the playoffs last year. And then the Packers came to town and they destroyed them in the first round of postseason. Okay, one game, good Packers team, good playoffs, move on, right? Well, that's been the same exact script at home this entire season. The Cowboys, in terms of playing the Packers, the Saints this year, the Ravens this year, and now the Lions, they've been outscored in the first half 110-35, which means that they are just getting absolutely the doors blown off them. And it's the same thing over and over again. It's an offense that can move the ball but struggles to score in the red zone. It's a defense that can't stop anything. They look like Swiss cheese out there. And I think that there was a stat tonight that Jared Goff had no close window throws on completing like over 12 yards per attempt at one point. Long story short, dudes were running wide open. David Montgomery, you remember that scouting report about David Montgomery where it's called him like the Frankenstein and it said he's got Saquon Barkley's speed and he's got the power of Jim Brown? Well, shoot, he looked like running back Frankenstein against this Cowboys defense. But to be honest with you, a lot of running backs have. Look at what Derrick Henry did to him, not too long ago. Mind you, that's a guy that lives in Dallas and wanted to come play for the Cowboys. Long story short, this safe haven has become a house of horrors for them. They are struggling at home, and it makes you wonder, okay, you're 0-3 at home and 3-0 on the road. Is this a Jekyll and Hyde situation? My assessment, this is time to look in the mirror, just like many players said tonight. And when you do find that, you'll find that this Cowboys team might not be as good as we thought.
It's been pretty crazy to watch this season. I mean, because I made a bet on the Cowboys to win the Super Bowl before the year because it was some boost from the sportsbook, and you're like, yeah, you might as well. Like, they're in that range, you're getting good odds. You know that they could, a couple things break their way, they could be in the hunt. And you watch them play football, and it's like they totally forgot how. It's ridiculous. Like, I haven't seen too much, but every time you turn it on, like the defense is just getting gashed. And that's a defense that coming into the year, everybody was saying like, oh, might be the best defense in the NFL. They create turnovers, they can get to the quarterback. It's shocking to see. And again, I didn't have a chance to watch that game, but you just saw on Twitter, and so you see the tweets pop up like, "Oh, you wonder if McCarthy's going to get fired." You're like, "Wow, that must be going bad." And then you see the actual numbers, and it's like, "Holy heck!" I mean, that's incredibly bad. So I'm curious to see. Like, they have some talent. You would think they could at least play some sort of functional football, but uh, we're a month and a half into a month into the season, and they still haven't figured that part out.
I mean, I'm fascinated by the situation that preceded this year and the fact that they felt an urgency to sign Dak Prescott. Like, up until he signed that contract, Joe, I thought it was just like predetermined he was going to play this out. Like, we were going to do like Kirk Cousins style, and they were going to put them in a position like keep their options open. The minute that they signed him to that deal and then did nothing as a result of the rest of the moves. I know, Joe, we were talking off air that the Cardinals and the Cowboys had very similar off seasons where felt like they really did not participate in free agency as much as some of these other teams. And certainly with Dallas, like, okay, they got some guys to sign, but you can get a running back in the draft high. You can get a couple different options in free agency to bring back Zeke and to bring back some of these options. I mean, those aren't serious options. So in turn, I would have assumed like, okay, they're clearly taking a step back, but then they signed Dak to that contract. And it's like, well, wait a minute, trying to have your cake and eat it too, where yeah, we don't want to invest as much, but we're going to pay the quarterback so we're not like unwatchable. And I think that that's kind of what Jerry is getting. Like, you're winning the games you're supposed to win against bad teams. Like, who'd they beat? They beat the Steelers with Justin Fields. They beat the Giants. They beat the Cleveland Browns, who could very well be the worst team in the NFL. So, like, their schedule's tough, Joe, and I'll let you speak on that. But it does feel like, hey, let's just do the bare minimum this year to get people to have intrigue, so we're not the Patriots, so we're not Carolina bad. And Dak's good for that, right? Like, the wheels are never going to fall off, knock on wood. Like, he's never going to get injured. He's always going to be available. He's always going to get, his garbage time yardage. But this is a far cry from the team that I thought last year had a chance to really make some noise in the NFC playoff picture.
Yeah, and Johnny, don't take this the wrong way, but the fact that you're so on point and so accurate about this, and you don't, spend every single day watching this team or covering this team, is kind of a testament to exactly where they are. Because the Cowboys, there's this kind of idea that if you go back in the offseason, Jerry Jones said we're going to be all in, right? But one of the things they kept saying is, our cap space is not there. We got a pretty low cap space. Well, other teams have found ways to maneuver around the cap, especially those who, quote, go all in. Maybe you mortgage your future a little bit, right? You trade some draft picks, you sign some guys, you go over the cap a little bit to make it happen, right? Cowboys were not willing to do that. Instead, they were willing to go very cheap in a lot of areas. The biggest free agent signing they had was Eric Kendricks for $3 million. And, they pushed a lot of these needs to the back burner. Even running back, though, to your point, Johnny, that was a position where, like, hey, Tony Pollard's gone. You're bringing back Rico Dowdle, who has an injury history, who showed some promise, and he showed some promise this season as well. Had a career night against the Steelers on Sunday night, and then they decided not to give him the ball at all because they wanted to give it to Zeke, who they hosted on a visit and got drinks with the night before the NFL draft. And that kind of told you exactly what they were going to do. They didn't draft a running back. They signed Nate Peat as an undrafted free agent who really had no shot. And long story short, I think it's getting to the crux of the Jerry Jones regime, right? The Cowboys have not won in a while, but they've been very relevant. They've been very valuable as a franchise. AT&T Stadium is packed every single game, even though the last 3 games you've heard "Let's Go Lions" chants, who dat for the Saints, and then "Let's Go Ravens" chants, ringing throughout the stadium for a long time. I think Jerry Jones' biggest fear is being irrelevant, and I think that if you go all in, you risk relevancy. If you kind of mortgage the future, you might pay the price eventually, and I don't think that's something he's willing to do.
I have that fear too, to be irrelevant. Do just enough to stay relevant here at All City, but don't go too all in where people expect something from me, right, Hank?
Oh, that's 100% correct. I mean, that's the motto. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that they're going with Zeke. I think that was one of those stories in the offseason that everybody looked at and was like, I mean, how could you possibly justify this? And then you see like, oh, Rico Dowdle's the other option. It's like, have I just totally missed the whole Rico Dowdle thing? Is he actually like this player that you want to get on the field and he's awesome? And you go back and look, it's like, yeah, I mean, 4 yards per carry, and it's a pretty small sample size. Like, good for Rico, and I guess you throw him out there. Why not? But the idea that you could just throw Zeke in the mix, and all of a sudden your running game could be like salvageable is it's just insane. And I don't know how you don't do something about that.
It does paint a picture though that like they paid Dak, they did not pay Mike McCarthy, they didn't saddle themselves with a bunch of extensions outside of CeeDee Lamb and Dak. Like, all right, Joe, talk to us about like where do you see this going? Because I saw comments from Jerry Jones in the postgame, like we're not even thinking about making coaching changes, and that's not even on his mind. That they were humbled today, but I mean, the minute you don't give Mike McCarthy security, like you've brought this on yourself, have you not?
Oh, 100%. I mean, Mike McCarthy and all the coaches are on expiring contracts. That is pretty much kind of the actual true meaning of all in. That, yeah, we're going to push the chips we do have as little as they are. And if it doesn't work, we're out. And I think that's kind of the situation with Mike McCarthy. Everyone's known it. And there's got to be some weird tension between, the coaches knowing that, hey, you're on prove it deals essentially. And also just look at what Jerry Jones has done, though, in the past. I mean, he let Jason Garrett go to an expiring contract multiple times. One time it resulted in an extension. The other time it didn't. So in terms of whether or not Mike McCarthy is going to be fired anytime soon, that's not going to happen. Jerry Jones was adamant about that we're not evaluating that, especially as they go into the bye week. But, you start to wonder, I mean, that's a tough schedule ahead of them. They're going to San Francisco after the bye week, and that's been a place or against a team that they've struggled mightily against. You go to Atlanta, a team that, has some talent that could run the ball all over the Cowboys, pretty poor run defense right now with Bijan Robinson and co. And then you got the Eagles and Houston after that. Long story short, this could get out of hand quickly. And you start to wonder if Jerry Jones is not going to evaluate Mike McCarthy's status now, when will he, if at all?
Oh man, it's dysfunction only we know here in the desert, Joe. We live it and breathe it just like you. I'm hopeful for Dallas to turn it around. I don't hate the Cowboys like a lot of Cardinal fans do. I like CeeDee Lamb a lot. I wish the Cardinals had drafted CeeDee Lamb, and there's a lot of games on the schedule that the Dallas, I mean, could help a lot of these teams like the Cardinals in the NFC West. Like beating San Francisco after the bye would help. But then you play at Atlanta, Philadelphia, Houston, Washington. I mean, it's getting tough real quick for Big D. Let's pivot, if we could, from one loss to yet another, but let's keep it on the afternoon slate. Unlike Mike McCarthy, I would assume somebody's job who is not in jeopardy, Mr. Hank, is when Sean Payton running the show for the Denver Broncos. And full transparency, when I was putting this rundown together for this show on Sunday Huddle, I thought, humbled by Jim Harbaugh, but in all actuality, was it a humbling experience, or was it just a byproduct of they had the better quarterback, did the Chargers, and it took Bo Nix a couple of quarters to get going? Give me your assessment today of a loss for Denver, but albeit by a touchdown against the Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, today was a tough showing. I think it was probably the most disappointing game the Broncos have played so far. It starts with Bo just being a smidge high on a pass over the middle. It gets tipped up in the air. And on the third play of the opening drive, it's intercepted. Chargers get the ball. And then on the first defensive play, Pat Surtain makes an incredible play to dive in, break up a pass, and winds up with a concussion on the play. And so you're down Pat Surtain, and you really need him. It's kind of interesting to watch them play without him because, for the past 4 years, people have been talking about whether you can draft a quarterback or a cornerback, when Justin Fields is still on the board. And that debate has just raged and raged and raged. And the importance of cornerbacks, it's often debated here in Denver, especially when you give the guy a contract that resets the cornerback market. But you see that defense play without him, and it's totally different. I mean, the Broncos blitz at the highest rate in the league, and it's worked for them because they get to play man coverage behind. Pat Surtain takes the number one out of the game, whether it's George Pickens or Mike Evans or DK Metcalf. Like, nobody has been able to get anything against Pat all year. And then you get to throw the other guys on the number 2 and the number 3. And it wasn't like a devastating defensive performance without him, but you're talking about a defense that was giving up 14.5 points per game coming into today, and a Chargers offense that, it's not the most exciting offense in the NFL. You give them 23 points, and the Broncos offense just can't put that number up. And I think that there are some lessons here for sure. The big one being that, first of all, 14.5 points per game is unsustainable. I mean, the no-fly zone defense, the Broncos defense that won Super Bowl 50, gave up 18.5 points per game. And as great as this defense has played, it's not 4 points per game better than the best defense in team history. So it's just some of those sorts of things where it's kind of a snap back to reality, because the defense has just carried the Broncos through this first month of the season. The average touchdown drive for the Broncos is 52 yards. They're getting the ball at their own 48, which is by far the best field position on touchdown drives in the NFL. So this, for the first time in a while, was the offense's opportunity to kind of take the lead and take the load off the defense's back. And it was terrible. I mean, Bo Nix was 4 for 14 for 27 yards going into the fourth quarter, and they didn't score a point until the third quarter. There's work to be done for sure in Denver.
Man, that just kind of hurts my soul. So I went to Oregon, full disclosure, and I watched a lot of Bo Nix, and oh man, it just hurts my heart to hear that that stat line going in the fourth quarter. But it kind of just, it's pretty evident of where he's at right now. I mean, clearly with this being a rookie quarterback, trying to figure things out. And there's something that we kind of talk about, with our Cowboys show, to bring it back there a little bit. We talk about Tyler Guyton all the time, right? And the first round rookie left tackle who has struggled mightily. And every week we've been like, well, he's got to go through growing pains and learn, and he'll get better, right? And they're like, right. And then a week goes by and he'll get better by the end of the season, right? And then another week goes by, is he going to get better by the end of the season? And I kind of find myself in that Bo Nix situation in Denver a little bit, where you start to wonder, it's like, hey, this is good for him, right? We got to get these lumps out of the way. He'll improve. And, I'm getting less confident as that goes on, especially in a game like today, when you fall down early and it kind of thrust it upon him to do something with it. And until the fourth quarter came, he really didn't do much.
Yeah. Go ahead, Hank.
Yeah, I think one of the reason I stay optimistic is because in the training camp, when they're implementing things defensively, the first day the defense implemented something, Bo struggled. But then as he got to see it a couple more times, he got better as it progressed. And Sean Payton obviously thinks he's incredibly smart. It's just kind of a matter of time before things click. And so I kind of hope that, this is the first time you play that Chargers defense. You're going to see him a lot. And you just hope, in my mind, that every time you play them, you just get a little bit better. Seeing the way the Steelers played them, seeing the way the Seahawks played them. The defense in the NFL are just so strange. And the second half offense has been a lot better than the first half offense. So I think that's where the optimism comes in. It's an introduction to the NFL. Rookie quarterbacks typically struggle. I can't say I've seen a lot of learning and adjusting, but I've definitely seen a little bit. And you just need that to keep coming.
Listen, I think Denver has exceeded expectations already. I think they're over under, Hank, correct me if I'm wrong, by most sports books was 4.5 or 5.5 this year. And
5.5.
Yes, for them to sit here and be 3-2 entering today's game, and I know they've beaten some fraudulent teams, but that's promising, especially with a quarterback that hasn't been as inconsistent. Now, a lot of that goes to Vance Joseph, which Vance is, not fully embraced here in Arizona. He had a tough finish here in his tenure with Cliff Kingsbury, as did most of us. But kudos to Vance Joseph, guys like Zach Allen stepping up. But here's my hesitation, and it has always been this way with Bo Nix. I think if Sean Payton is back in the NFC South, where Baker Mayfield can thrive, because that division is certainly compromised, especially the quarterback position, I think they could rattle off a couple division titles and be very competent. I question Bo Nix's ceiling in the quarterback gauntlet that is the AFC. And maybe it'll deteriorate over time, but we just got finished talking about Joe Burrow, and they're underachieving this year. And I think most of us would agree, Joe Burrow's a better quarterback, has a better set of skills than Bo Nix. But just in that division alone, Herbert on the other side with no weapons with the Chargers should only get better under Jim Harbaugh. Everything that's going on with Kansas City and their dynasty right now. And I'm guessing the Raiders are going to take a quarterback, you would hope, in the top 5 of the NFL draft next year. I think Sean Payton is good enough that the Broncos will never be terrible, and you will never have the bottom fall out from you. But like, I do think for Bo Nix to kind of reach his ceiling, they're going to have to build this roster up, take full advantage, Hank, of that rookie wage scale, that rookie salary cap, flush it with free agents, go to, load up on star players and try to hit a window with him. Not only because of his rookie wage scale, but because he is an older player. As funny as it sounds, like I think the Broncos have about a 5-year window with Bo Nix and Sean Payton, especially as he gets older in his career, to win and be very viable. So if they finish this year anywhere above like 6-7 wins, like that's a hell of a year for them. And they've got the Raiders still left on their schedule. I think they play the Saints, Peyton's old team. So I'm not discounting them. I just question, like, are you drafting Bo Nix to win you Super Bowls, or are you drafting Bo Nix to just like be relevant? And it's the same conversation we were just having with Joe about Dallas. It feels kind of like in between, right? So I'm not selling my Bo Nix stock, I guess is what I am telling you.
I mean, that's great news. I love to hear it. Yeah, I think the reason that today was such a blow to Broncos fans is just because the Broncos haven't been relevant, and today was kind of a chance to take that step. If they were 4-2 right now with that win, then this would be the first time that they've been 2 games over 500 this late in a season since 2016, which sounds pretty crazy to say, but that's just how bad things have been in Denver. And like you said about the NFC South, well, the next 2 games are the Saints and the Panthers. So if you're sitting here at 4-2, all of a sudden you see the path to 6-2, and this could be a surprise season. Now you go down to New Orleans on Thursday and say this game's a must-win. Like you've got to get this one. You've got to get the Panthers game, get to 5-3, because then you've got the Ravens and the Chiefs up next, and those are going to be tough games. So today was, in my mind, the game that kind of could put them on a path to having their first playoff appearance since 2016. But, it didn't go that way, and you just want to keep seeing the rookie get better. And who knows, maybe they can make a run late.
Hank, that's a great point too that you brought up about being relevant and getting there, because I have a buddy who's a diehard Broncos fan, so I know really well just how much of a struggle it's been since those kind of glory days that we saw with the Super Bowl. But this was not only a chance to get relevant, but also a chance to kind of be that second team in the AFC West, especially because it's against the Chargers, who are kind of vying for the same thing, a team that's kind of underperformed with Justin Herbert for what you would expect. And the fact that they were able to come out and beat you, that's a significant blow, because everyone's chasing the Chiefs, obviously in the NFL, but specifically in that division. And, to be able to be that kind of number 2 team that could maybe consistently kind of, hey, we'll compete with the Chiefs, maybe even earlier than expected because you have a rookie quarterback. That's a great point, because that's kind of a little inside the schedule demoralizing loss. And, when you think about it from a division perspective too.
Yeah, I think Broncos are ahead of schedule with where many of us thought they would be, and that's a credit again to Sean Payton and Vance Joseph. And I fully expect them to hover around 500, at least until the bye and get back into those divisional games. Any final thoughts on your 2 games, gentlemen, before we dive into the pit of despair here on the early slate? Anything that we didn't cover?
Cowboys are going on the road where they're undefeated the next 2 games. So I guess there's hope, but then also, to quote Ted Lasso, it's the hope that kills you. So I don't know.
Wow. I can't speak to hope. There hasn't been hope in Denver in a long time.
What a sad podcast this is. Adam Hogue, we all can't be fortunate to travel to London and watch our team put up 5 offensive touchdowns here. We're slumming it with our losing franchises here, and that caps us off with our game recaps. We talked about this off air, Joe. The Arizona Cardinals lose to the Green Bay Packers today, 34-13. They attempted to do something they have not done in 3+ years, since October 24th of 2021. If everybody's listening closely, the Cardinals attempted to win back-to-back games for the first time in 3 years. They failed again. They have opportunities the rest of this year, but after beating San Francisco last week, they went into the early slate today and subsequently peed the bed against a Packer team that has really let a lot of teams hang around. They have a couple wins against bad teams with Malik Willis, but what you saw today, you would have thought, Jordan Love was peak Aaron Rodgers all day to throw. I mean, it's a really disheartening performance. And I think, Joe, your exposure to JG, Jonathan Gannon in Philadelphia, I would imagine was a positive one. And we've heard a lot of the same from the accompanied beats here at All City. But right now, you've got 2 blowout losses in the matter of 3 weeks in the second year of this quote unquote rebuild. And it's incredibly disheartening for this fan base because at the end of last year, they were a missed field goal away from being 4-4 with Kyler Murray in the lineup. So you would assume you get all the offseason resources. They had 7 picks in the top 90. They had $75 million in cap space to spend. And they're all of 2-4 that their record is. Now they've played a gauntlet of a schedule. Every team they have played outside of the Rams has a winning record. And that continues next week at home against those same Chargers, Hank. They play on ESPN Plus on Monday Night Football, which I did not know was a thing. So it's ESPN, Monday Night Football, and then ESPN Plus. You can watch Kyler Murray take on Justin Herbert. But, I mean, as far as this game goes, Cardinals turned it over 3 times. I'm going to read you guys the possessions that they had today. All right. So here are the offensive possessions for the Arizona Cardinals. Punt, 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 punt. They did have a touchdown. Field goal, fumble, fumble, fumble. That was the game today. None of those turnovers came from their quarterback, Kyler Murray, yet they put up 13 points in Lambeau Field. Any takeaways from a Cardinal game that was otherwise forgettable in the early slate? Joe, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I was just talking about it's the hope that kills you. And I think that, the Cardinals are kind of a good example. I did not know that stat until we talked about it, Johnny, and my mind is still kind of blown away from that because you would think at some point that you get a win, there'd be a back-to-back games against poor teams, but it's kind of like, it's almost as mystifying as, to bring it back to the Cowboys again, of just like why are you winless in your last 4 games at home and just getting destroyed? Like, what is up with your team that you just cannot put 2 and 2 together and win back-to-back games? And, the fact that you read that drive chart off, and it just kind of, I think the thing that kind of always mystifies me about this Cardinals team is, us in Dallas, we know Kyler Murray well. He went to Allen High School down the street. He is arguably the best player in Texas high school football history, which is an honor that is, you look at some of these other guys, that's incredible, right? And it's because of how much pressure he can put on a defense and what he can do. And we saw last week against San Francisco. I mean, he's throwing up the deuces as he's running up to the end zone because he's so talented. And yet I look up, and kind of similar to what you guys were talking about earlier, where you look over and you're like, wait, the score of the game is that because it was the early game? And I'm just like, how is this happening? And, I think the Cardinals, man, like, you got to get some consistency there. And maybe that goes back to Kyler. Maybe it goes back to just keeping drives alive and staying in games because, similar to what we saw in both of our games, Hank, once you get down early like that, your entire offense goes out the window and you're playing catch-up mode. And usually it doesn't work out well, just like we saw with Arizona against Green Bay today.
Yeah, I mean, to me, when I think about the Cardinals, I just go back to that Week 1 game against the Bills. Because if you're able to pull that one off, and they had the ball down 6 with 2 minutes left, something like that, with Kyler Murray, a guy who I think is more than capable of going down the field and scoring a touchdown. I mean, if you win that one, then all of a sudden you're 3-3, and it just changes the entire vibe. It's absolutely been a gauntlet schedule. I think you've seen some awesome flashes of what this team could be. Like I saw today, Trey McBride, Colorado State guy, had like 98 yards. I think that they have maybe not all the pieces they need to be successful, but at least enough. And I'm not sure if the schedule opens up at some point, but I'm optimistic that they can be a good football team built off of the structure that they have right now. I don't think that this is a team that needs to be torn down and rebuilt. The pieces, for some reason, just don't quite fit together the way you'd think they would.
I mean, this is their schedule to open up the year. At Bills, then Rams at home. But I mean, it's a McVay-Shanahan-led team. Then Detroit, the Commanders, who are white hot, at the Niners, at the Packers. I mean, it's about as difficult of a 6-game stretch to start the year. And then they play the Chargers, the Dolphins, the Bears, and the Jets ahead of the bye. So 4 of the top 10 defenses in the NFL. Here's where I'm at with this team right now. They are flawed, but they are a byproduct, in my opinion, of trying to have your cake and eat it too. When this regime took over 18 months ago, They had an opportunity to say, we're going to embrace Kyler Murray and build around him, or we're going to pivot and completely rebuild, and it's going to take time, and we're going to get a Bo Nix. We're going to get a J.J. McCarthy. And then you buy yourself equity with the fan base. Well, what happened last year? They told everybody, not with their words, but with their actions, we're trading Isaiah Simmons. We're gutting this down. We're starting Joshua Dobbs. Everybody knew what last year was. And then Kyler came back and showed a lot of promise. And so everybody said, okay, let's load up in the offseason. Certainly don't compromise your future, but make yourself viable and relevant. Well, they have taken an approach where they have embraced Kyler Murray, and to his credit, he's had a phenomenal offseason. I think he's playing well this year. He only has 2 turnovers on the year. And they're paying him $50+ million, but they're treating the rest of the roster like the situations around the NFL, like New England, like some of these teams that are basically starting from scratch. But then, oh, by the way, now you have expectations because Kyler Murray is your quarterback, and he's going to be 28 next year. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Either fully commit to this rebuild, and you should have moved off of him and gotten a rookie and started everything over, or a bridge guy. Or, in my opinion, you should have said, let's go out and spend a little bit more. They're sitting on $30 million in cap space. They didn't spend that money. They didn't add anybody of note to go get an edge rusher in free agency. They haven't had an edge rusher sack in over a month. And this is Jonathan Gannon's defense we're talking about. And then you look on the flip side offensively. They have managed to do the one thing that I did not even think my Arizona Cardinals could do. They are ruining Marvin Harrison Jr. He left today's game with a concussion, okay, save for the breakout game against the LA Rams where he took over. I mean, he's been a very average receiver by the box score. Now, we've talked to everybody on our show. I'm going to do a bunch of shameless plugs here. Mina Kimes, Michael Wilson, Brian Baldinger. We have all of them on in rotation, PHNX Cardinals. And the common denominator is this is not a Marvin problem. This is a byproduct of trying to fit Marvin into a scheme offensively with Drew Petzing, who came from Kevin Stefanski in Cleveland, that wants to fit a square peg into a round hole, that wants to run the football. I'm sorry, there are expectations when you take a player of this caliber not to scheme them open and showcase them and make them a focal point of your offense. The Arizona Cardinals under Drew Petzing, since he took over last year, I tweeted this out. I couldn't believe it. I had to chart it after the game. 23 games, they've got one 100-yard wide receiver, and it was Marvin and 2. It's just unbelievable. These stats are so incredibly sobering for Cardinal fans. So, like, I'm sitting here, I'm buying Kyler Murray, maybe not as the number 1 overall pick savior he was once thought to be. Like, I'm probably at the point where he's never going to be Mahomes or Josh Allen. But, like, I do think, like, just like Dak Prescott and some of these quarterbacks closer to like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, he can very much win you games, keep you relevant, win you a division. Like, that's not nothing in the NFL. But he can't overcome what's happening right now with the state of this roster. So you're in a tough spot where this coaching staff, and to your point, Joe and Hank, they have some winnable games on the back half of their schedule. They play the Carolinas, they play Seattle, they play the Patriots, right? They get the Rams again. But at that point, like, are you going to be like 3-8? Are you going to be like 3-7? Everybody wants to compare this to Detroit. Year 2 under Dan Campbell with Jared Goff, they were like, what was it, 1-6? Then they became the juggernaut they are now. And I keep telling everybody, Joe, that's the outlier. You know, that's not the norm. The norm is typically when you're bad, you stay bad. And then it creates, in my opinion, unrealistic expectations for Gannon next year to have to immediately win for a team that has single-digit dubs each of the last 2 years.
Let me ask you guys a quick question, because we talked about this on our podcast a couple weeks ago. And I'm just curious. And obviously you guys are not in the NFC East, but who would you say the best head coach in the NFC East is? Good question, right?
Probably McCarthy by default, but like I think Daboll is a good head coach. I think he's being held back by his quarterback.
So I answered Bill Belichick in 2025 for either the Giants or Cowboys, but I was thinking Daboll would be a contender, and a big reason why is, and you touched on this, Johnny, with Marvin Harrison and what they're doing schematically. Go look at what they do with Malik Neighbors, and obviously I think Danny Dimes is holding them back a little bit, right? I think the running game's a little bit, Devin Singletary had a good run, but it's not that great. Go look at what they've done with Malik Neighbors when he's been healthy. They are putting him in motion constantly. They are scheming him wide open. They are doing whatever they can to get their best weapon, the ball. And I think that's something that a lot of offensive coordinators forget to do, and especially with a guy like Marvin Harrison. Scheme him open, put him in motion, make sure that, like, hey, we're going to run, him off of Trey McBride this way. He's going to get attention, and we're going to try to get one-on-one matchups, Marvin Harrison against linebackers. And that, opens up everything else for Kyler Murray, and it opens it up for McBride and Wilson, and then you're off and running from there. And I think one thing that this Cowboys team, too, has kind of taught me this season is, like, if you're not scheming, you're not trying. And I think Arizona might be kind of similar in that boat as well. One more thing, Johnny, you touched on that I really liked. It's to have your cake and eat it too. I think one of the most mistreated first-round pick quarterback projects we've ever seen was Trey Lance in San Francisco, because they tried to have their cake and eat it too. Let's get a raw prospect and develop him. But we also have a Super Bowl window that we're trying to do, so we're not going to develop him. It was a massive failure in San Francisco because of the cake and eat it too philosophy. And I think that's something that if you're an NFL team, you really got to guard against, for the sake of being relevant. No, you either got to go all in, to quote Jerry Jones, or go all out.
Yeah, and I totally agree with everything you're saying about Marvin Harrison. Also, I mean, he has more yards than anybody on the Broncos roster. He has more touchdowns than anybody on the Broncos roster. Like, it's not like the sky is falling here.
He had 100, and not to interrupt you, he had 130 yards and 2 touchdowns in a quarter, the first quarter against the LA Rams. And then from there, it's been like, you know what? We're just going to treat you like just a guy, a complimentary guy. There's no creativity. Like, I bring this up, gentlemen, all the time. When he's at Ohio State, like, give Ryan Day credit. Not this weekend, obviously, and Joe, you're relishing in that, I'm sure. But, like, they would do end-arounds with him. They would do bubble screens. They would get him isolated. It's this route tree he's running. It's like, yes, he's getting singled up against number 1 corners, but there's no creativity. He and Kyler Murray are not on the same page. Everything looks hard. And this is not just like a top 10 receiver. This is supposed to be Randy Moss reincarnated, Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones. Like, do better. Do better. Like, you're getting paid to take a prospect like that and put him on a pedestal and make him a focal point. And, like, you forget about him. He's just not around. They have to do a better job. Absolutely. It's an embarrassment.
100%. I mean, like you're saying with Neighbors, like the Raiders do a great job with Brock Bowers. Like, it's what you do. Like, if you draft that guy that high, you build your offense around him. And to not do that is just a massive mistake. Also, for a rookie receiver, he's playing pretty well, and the numbers are not that bad.
Yeah. It's frustrating because I think, listen, Kyler Murray throws a beautiful deep ball. He's got a big-time arm. He's on pace for, like, 3,200 yards passing. And Marvin can't produce through the air. It's like the common denominator is, and I like Drew Petzing. I thought he did a lot of good things last year, but, man, you got to be able to scheme for your talent. And it felt like last year with no expectations, he did much better than clearly this year with increased expectations. Like, if the Cardinals are going to be competitive, it's not with this defense. It has to be with their offense. All right, well, we've drowned in our sorrows of our 3 disaster outcomes today. Let's go around the room, gentlemen. We play a little game on PHNX Cardinals called Trending Up, Trending Down. Let's start with Trending Up. You can pick anything in the NFL that you saw over the course of the last couple of days. It can be a team, an entity, a coach, a player that's better than you thought, that you certainly maybe had preconceived expectations, that's moving up. Joe, you got one to kick us off?
Yeah, I think there's no other place to start than Chicago, or maybe London for this example. I think Caleb Williams is trending up. I think that this is a guy that's, it's kind of a testament. And I saw someone tweet this too. Maybe it was Daniel Jeremiah. This is why you don't write off people after a couple games, or you don't, put a label on them for what they are, especially in their first few games as a pro. Caleb Williams is looking more comfortable. We knew that the weapons that he had were honestly almost unparalleled across this league, if you kind of look around. And they're starting to deliver. I know the Jags are not murderer's row, and I know that Trevor Lawrence is not, some guy to go head up and duel against, and that's not a great thing in today's, world because he's been struggling. But Caleb Williams is starting to look the part. I think that's trending up. The other trending up, I'll say, is San Francisco. They struggled mightily. You saw Johnny last week in Arizona, but that's a team that got a big win on Thursday. And part of me wonders if they're finally starting to figure things out, and some of that injury bug is starting to, kind of at least chill out a little bit.
I like it.
Okay.
I'll go Falcons. I know they're playing the Panthers, but to put 38 points up on somebody, this to me was kind of a prove it game. Like, we know that they're good. They've played well against the Chiefs. They have some great wins already this season. But to go out there and just stomp the Panthers, and some of the numbers are pretty awesome. Like, they've got Tyler Algier, 18 carries, 105 yards. Bijan 15 for 95. Those guys combined for 3 touchdowns. Like, to have both of those performances in the same game, I get it's the Panthers, so it is what it is. But still, like, that is the domination you should see. And then you look through the receiving stats, and Kyle Pitts the last couple games has looked really good, which is good, and I'm happy for him. 2 weeks ago, all the Broncos fans were talking about, like, hey, maybe you could make a deal. Last year the rookie contract. If they trade him, they're insane because they look awesome. They've got him going now. Falcons might be more than just like good offense. We'll see if they can give a couple good teams some good fights. I wonder if they could actually be one of the very, very best NFC teams.
Hank, you talking about Algier, and sorry to cut you off there, Johnny, but
you're good.
You talking about Algier and Robinson, man. Like, we have this joke where we do Cowboys win, Cowboys lose because, and we'll give a reason why the Cowboys will win, and then me and Jesse Holly, one of my co-hosts, will always look at each other and be like, Cowboys will lose, and in 2 weeks against Atlanta, this is what we'll say. Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson ran for a combined 250 yards and 3 touchdowns. And hearing that stat line, I can see it now. It's good. It's inevitable. Sorry.
They're super talented offensive. They also have like one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. It's sneaky good. I'll tell you who else is sneaky good. Liam Cohen. Does anybody know who that is? That's Tampa Bay's offensive coordinator, who was fired in this division, the NFC West, 2 years ago. The year the Rams kind of bottomed out when Stafford was hurt, and it was the year off their Super Bowl. And so he went to Kentucky and was their offensive coordinator. And then he's back in the NFL. So Dave Canales, everybody thought, he was a big reason why Baker Mayfield took off. And I'll give him credit, helped him get the Panther job. But Liam Cohen this year for Tampa Bay, I mean, that offense, they put up 51 points today. Last week in a loss, they put up 30. The week before that, 33 points against the Eagles. Outside of Vance Joseph and the Broncos shutting them down, Hank, like Tampa Bay offensively is unbelievable. They've got a rookie today that put together a run. I saw it cut next to a Reggie Bush run. Bucky Irving, who was tremendous, Joe, at Oregon, who fell to the 4th round, looks fantastic, looks way better than Trey Benson here in Arizona out of the ACC. So, I don't know if I buy Tampa as like an NFC contender, but now that, nobody in the NFC East looks good. Hutchinson just went down for Detroit. The NFC West is down. Like, can Tampa be a team? I know they made the divisional round. Like, I don't think I'm going to say Tampa is going to make the NFC Championship game, but they do have a collection of talent right now, especially offensively. That Baker Mayfield looks just tremendous. I mean, he's unbelievable. I know he threw 3 picks today. I used to say the same thing watching Carson Palmer and Kurt Warner. Like, I don't care about interceptions. If you can come right back, have a short memory, put up monster passing yards, and get points on the board. I would much rather have a quarterback throw multiple interceptions that then can produce scoring drives over somebody that's doing like 1 touchdown a game.
Yeah, no doubt, dude. Baker's been fantastic. I've always had such a soft spot for Baker because he is such a gunslinger's gunslinger. He just does not care. He'll rock a mustache. He's been fantastic, and I think that's a great call about the Bucs. And to your point, Johnny, I mean, this is in the NFC West. This NFC is weird. This NFC is open. The Minnesota Vikings, are far and away the most dominant team, but it's still Sam Darnold at quarterback, and you still kind of question that. And maybe they're this year's Lions and they go to the NFC Championship game, or maybe the Bucs are. And man, that's a great pick because I think they've been fantastic so far.
Absolutely. All right. And you brought up Bucky Irving, who's electric, and obviously going back and watching a lot of Oregon from last year. Awesome running back. Also, Sean Tucker from Syracuse, who I thought was crazy underrated last year in the draft. He wound up being like a 7th round pick or something. Barely played at all. Goes for 136 yards today. Insane. Brings his season total to 143. Just out of nowhere. Shows up with Bucky Irving, too.
A lot of good mojo going on in Tampa. How about some bad mojo around the NFL? Trending down. let's put our teams aside for a second, because I do think, especially for Joe and I, it's easy to nitpick in Arizona and Dallas. But Hank, I'll start with you. Somebody or an entity trending down around the NFL.
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, give me the Commanders. I know it sounds crazy, but it's a product of all the hype we had given them before. And to me, I was starting to have crazy Commanders thoughts. And this is probably unfair to put them in the trending down category because they lost to the Ravens and it was a close game and all that. But there was some magic with Jaden Daniels that disappeared a little bit today, particularly in the passing game. And there were so many good stats in the past couple of weeks, like the more scoring drives than incompletions. And it seems like this is kind of the first time we've seen the Commanders hit adversity, which was bound to happen. And that's why this is probably unfair. But that's the one thing that probably disappoints me, because it would have been a lot of fun to see the Commanders do what they do against the Ravens, put up 35 points on them. Because if that happens, then all of a sudden, Super Bowl is a crazy thing to say about a rookie quarterback, but again, just the history that they were making week in and week out was unbelievable, and that momentum just stopped today.
And it's so funny because they're still the leaders by a large margin in this clubhouse of the NFC East. And I get it too, because to your point, I thought this was Jaden Daniels' almost first sobering moment, a little bit of like, hey, there's that, because he was so efficient and so accurate, but still pushing the ball downfield. Today, a little bit tougher. So little quick inside knowledge about the Cowboys. They work out of this facility called the Star, where they have this big little practice field in front of the indoor stadium where they practice, right? And it's got the full Cowboys logo and everything. Well, after the Saints demolished the Cowboys, they had Saints fans going to that, planting their flag, stepping on the Cowboys logo, and saying, hey, we're here to do a wellness check on a team that we just destroyed. Since then, the Saints have not been good. They were on top of the world. They have not been good since. Here in Dallas, we were ready to call Clint Kubiak the next head coach of the Cowboys. We were ready to give Derek Carr MVP along with multiple flowers. And in reality, they've been struggling. I know that, Derek wasn't out there today. Spencer Rattler got the start against the red-hot Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But that's still a team that's just, I think that people were already kind of starting to buy a little stock in them, especially in the NFC South that could be open. All that stock is clearly on the floor right now. And I have an honorable mention one, but I kind of think that Johnny's going to go with it too. So I'm curious to see if he does.
I'll stay in the NFC West. I will bury an NFC West rival out of pettiness every chance I can get. And to be fair, I did see this coming. The Seattle Seahawks are big-time frauds. Maybe the most fraudulent 3-0 start in modern NFL history. They beat Bo Nix in the opener, which that game was close. I bet on the Broncos that game. The Broncos led at times. Hank, you know that. So they beat Bo Nix at home. Then they face Drake May and have to beat him in overtime. Then they face Skylar Thompson for Miami at home. They have subsequently lost to Detroit, Danny Dimes and the Giants, and then that game against the 49ers was not competitive. I am not a Pete Carroll fan, but I respect Pete Carroll. I respected Pete Russell Wilson. Like, you're not going to be able to fool me. Like, you can't seamlessly transition off of those two, in my opinion, Hall of Famers, and just be fine. They have a lot of talent at weird spots. They have like 3 really good, capable receivers, but their offensive line isn't good, and their defense is deteriorating. Like Mike McDonald, to me, everybody thought he was going to be an upgrade over Pete Carroll. We'll see how that works out, because now their schedule becomes real fast. They play at Atlanta, Bills, Rams, 49ers, Cardinals, Jets. They play the Packers, the Vikings still, the Bears. Like, I think there's a good chance, like after a 3-0 start, Seattle's closer like a 6-7 win team. And again, like Geno Smith, I think he is who he is. I think he's got a little bit of Jameis in him. I think the refinement in his throws aren't quite there anymore. I think DK Metcalf could be on his way out. Like, there's just a weird team right now. I like Jackson Smith and Jigba a lot, but Kenneth Walker's a good player. But to me, it's like when people are having him like top 5 to 10 in their power rankings at 3-0, I'm like, just because they've beaten bad teams doesn't make them a great team. So they are unequivocally, I've been frauding up the Seahawks for the last 6 weeks easily.
Johnny, that's exactly who I thought you were going to pick too. That's hilarious, man. Geno Smith, dude, is a guy that like, and I think I've been kind of hinting at this throughout this podcast. Just because you have a quarterback doesn't mean you have to pay him. And I think that Geno was also the tough one where it's like, oh, he has such a good story. They wrote me off, so I didn't write back. And now it's like, do we pay him? They decided to, and I almost think that they're kind of, when you decide to pay a guy like Geno Smith, you're almost committing to the middling, being in it but not in it kind of philosophy. And it's funny, I did a story on Texas quarterback Quinn Ewers, a long time ago, and his agent, the first time his agent saw him was in 8th grade, and he was on the phone with John Schneider, the Seahawks GM, and he said, John Schneider's like, hey, are you at a football game? And the agent told him, yeah, I'm watching your future NFL quarterback for the Seahawks right now. And that was when Quinn Ewers was in 8th grade. So I've had this kind of philosophy that eventually they're going to pivot off and go to Quinn Ewers eventually, and maybe it's this season, but I don't know. That's a great pick though, Johnny.
Yeah, the NFC West is down this year, and it pains me because the Cardinals are playing into that. This could be the one year where you could have taken advantage if the right moves were there to be made. Like most of the time, it looks like the NFC North does the NFC West. So disappointing nonetheless. All right, as we wrap up here on an All-City NFL Sunday Huddle, looking ahead to this next week. Joe, I know that the Cowboys are on a bye. I want to get to you in a second, but let's start with you, Hank. The Denver Broncos on a short week play at the Saints. Now, I think this is Sean Payton's first trip back to New Orleans since he left a couple of years ago. Your expectations for a very winnable game suddenly. Now, Derek Carr has been out. I don't know if he's going to stay out. Spencer Rattler was mostly average today. Like, how big of a game, how much pressure is on Vance Joseph and the rest of the team to perform with Sean Payton at the helm?
I mean, this is a huge game for a lot of reasons. I mentioned like the standing situation. You've got the Saints, you got the Panthers in the next 2 weeks. Then you've got the Ravens and the Chiefs. So kind of 2 winnable games, 2 not so winnable games. You're sitting at 500. You're probably trying to stay at 500 through this stretch. I don't think that Sean Payton cares about that at all, though. I think he just wants to beat the Saints. And my initial reaction would be, there's no way Sean Payton loses to the Saints because he's probably been drawing up the game plan for months, maybe years. He might have started working on this one the day he decided to leave New Orleans because he knew he was coming back at some point. But saying that, I said the same thing about Sean Payton playing Nathaniel Hackett last year, and Hackett got the better of that one. So maybe I can't just say like, there's no way he loses. It's huge for Sean. Because he's like a god in New Orleans. They had bad football for decades and decades and decades before he got there with Drew Brees and they did. But it's going to be fun in a Thursday night football kind of way with Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler. I think the Broncos will win. I'm not putting money on it though. Nothing would surprise me in this one.
It'll be fun with Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler is something I never thought I would hear anyone say, but we're going to have fun anyway, Joe. Any thoughts on Sean Payton returning back to New Orleans?
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated just to see it. I think that also feels just so Thursday night football though. Spencer Rattler versus Bo Nix, Sean Payton going back. So there is a storyline, but it's also not that important of a storyline ultimately in the grand scheme of things. I'm just kind of hoping for a let's get weird kind of game. Let's just have chaos. The Lions today ran tackle eligible plays on 11 plays, and they did a hook and ladder to Panay Sewell at one point to try and score a touchdown when they were already up 40. I kind of want to see some magic like that out of Sean Payton as he goes back to play the Saints.
I'm right there with you. I will be watching with my 9-year-old, and we will bask in the grossness of Thursday night football. And I do think the Broncos get the win. I think they're a very respectable 4-3. Will the Cowboys keep it respectable, albeit in their bye week? All right, Joe, I'm going to put you on the spot. Can the Cowboys do something to appease their fan base within the next 2 weeks? Like, will they add a running back? Will they fire a coach? Will they? No, you're already shaking your head. So the status quo the next 14 days for Dallas is your prediction.
100%. Yeah. To quote the great Jerry Jones, and if any Cowboys fans are listening, you might want to close your ears on this quote. We like our guys. He's been adamant about that from the beginning. I think it just goes back to just being relevant. And, I even think that the fact that they're on a bye will mean that there's conversation about Mike McCarthy's job. And I think that they're just going to let that steam and just be relevant that way. So I think ultimately that's a win for the Cowboys in the bye week, is just staying relevant.
Man, that's brutal. Like, I'm watching Zeke get carries in that fourth quarter of that game. That's like one step from the retirement home, man. It's like the old timers on the PGA Tour. Like, let's just get him some carries, respectability. That's what it felt like watching that today.
Yeah, it's kind of like that one commercial where like Emmitt Smith puts back on the jersey and Dan Marino puts back on the jersey. It's like, God, man, we don't need senior league football, right? But no, Zeke just, he's been exactly what everyone thought, frankly. And he's got good leadership for the team. The players really look to him. He's a veteran in the locker room, but I think that's ultimately where he should kind of be relegated in terms of his role as of right now. It just hasn't been beyond expectations, let's say.
Yeah, I love expectations. We appreciate everybody. Drop a like on this video. I didn't mention the Cardinals. Does anybody want to hear about the Cardinals play on Monday Night Football against Justin Herbert and company? A lot of people are saying the season is on the line. If they win, they're 3-4. And again, the schedule softens up. If they lose, they're 2-5. And I think at that point, if you're asking my opinion, like, you need to start taking calls on guys like Budda Baker. You need to make some of these veterans available, guys that are under contract from the prior regime with Steve Keim, and do yourself a favor. I don't know if they'll do that. That would be the smart thing, in my opinion. They had 7 picks in the top 90. They've added over 20 draft picks the last 2 years. There's no excuse. Every one of those players, for the most part, if they have a pulse, should be playing on this team. If this team is 2-5, 2-6, but Kyler Murray stands right now. For those who's asking, he's got one of the best TD to interception ratios in the NFL. He's also 8th in QBR, and that's for a team with just 2 wins out of 6 games. So, a lot on the line here as we enter mid-October for all 3 of these teams. Joe, tell the people where they can find you and your fantastic work for DLLS.
Yeah, you can go to alldlls.com, and then you can see me on social media at Joe J. Hoyt. We got the bye week coming up, so there's a lot to write about right now, and we'll see if anything happens. But yeah, check it out. Really been enjoying our first year with the All City family, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, anybody who wants more Broncos talk, head over to the DNVR Sports YouTube channel, thednvr.com. That's where everything I write goes, and then we're on Twitter, of course, too. So that's where you can check it out.
Everybody subscribe to the NFL ALLCITY Sunday Huddle podcast. Big thanks to Adam Hogue for letting us take over as they're partying it up, no doubt, in London following a big CHGO Chicago Bears rout of the fraudulent Jacksonville Jaguars. You can follow me at Johnny Venerable. Follow the podcast PHNX Cardinals. Big thanks to producer Emma Extraordinaire, keeping us looking good on a Sunday night. Big thanks to everybody in the chat. Drop a like. We're back next Sunday. For Joe, Hank, I'm Johnny Venerable. We'll see you then.
We all silly like the mayor.